Welcome to this explainer. Right now, there is absolutely a monumental shift happening in international economics. And you know what? It really boils down to just two things: money and trust. Today, we're looking at how the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM for short, isn't just some new set of regulations passing through the EU. It's actually the catalyst for a brand new, highly lucrative global commodity. We're literally moving from trading physical goods to trading verifiable trust.
So let's dive into this with a massive, kind of crazy challenge. How do you accurately put a price tag on invisible global carbon emissions? Think about it. When a company imports 1,000 tons of steel, we can weigh it, we can test its physical strength, we can easily figure out its market value. But the carbon emitted into the atmosphere while making that steel, it's completely invisible. It floated away weeks or months ago from a smokestack halfway across the world. Figuring out how to track, measure, and price that invisible ghost of manufacturing, well, that's the exact puzzle the global market is trying to solve right now.
To break this all down, we'll go through 4 parts today. 1. The carbon verification problem. 2. What exactly is CBAM? 3. Creating the trust market. And 4. The future of global trade.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the carbon verification problem, or the invisible challenge in global supply chains.
Okay, so for years, policymakers have been trying to tax or cap industrial emissions. But here's the rub. When a single region, like the EU, imposes strict, expensive carbon pricing on its own domestic factories, a massive loophole suddenly appears. Imagine a thriving steel plant operating in Germany that just gets hit with steep carbon taxes. To avoid those costs, the company might just pack up and move manufacturing right across the border to a country where carbon regulations are weak or basically non-existent. We call this carbon leakage. The crucial point here is that without global standards, global emissions aren't actually reduced at all, they're just relocated. The pollution literally just leaks out of regulated zones and pours into unregulated ones, which completely defeats the entire purpose of the policy. Which brings us to a really tricky hurdle. Let's say that factory doesn't relocate, but decides to import raw materials to stay competitive instead. Honestly, anyone can slap a sustainable label on a shipping container and claim their imported manufacturing materials are totally green. But proving it? That takes a serious chain of custody. If you guys steal from an overseas plant, how do you mathematically prove to your local government that the plant used clean energy instead of just burning coal? You can't just take their word for it, right?
And that perfectly tees up Section 2. What exactly is CBAM, the EU's new regulatory mechanism?
Looked at neutrally, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM, is essentially an economic tool designed to make sure imported goods face the exact same carbon pricing as goods produced domestically within the European Union. Think of it as an equalizer. The EU is basically saying, hey, if our local producers have to pay a premium for the carbon they emit during manufacturing, then anyone who wants to sell their products into our market has to pay that exact same premium. It completely wipes out the financial incentive of carbon leakage by taxing that invisible carbon right at the border.
Now, CBAM isn't targeting everything all at once. The initial rollout is laser-focused on 3 major industries: iron and steel, cement, and fertilizers. These are highly carbon-intensive sectors that basically form the backbone of modern infrastructure and global agriculture. By starting here, regulators are tackling the massive, heavy-hitting industrial emissions first. And it creates a highly consequential testing ground for how this policy actually functions in the messy real world of international trade.
What's fascinating is how this introduces a really strict chain of custody for compliance. It turns abstract environmental goals into hardcore accounting steps. Step 1. Companies have to measure their primary embedded emissions. We are not talking about vague industry estimates here. We're talking about the actual quantifiable carbon locked into the production of their specific goods. Then comes Step 2, which is the real game changer. That data absolutely must be verified by authorized independent auditors. You literally cannot grade your own homework anymore. Finally, Step 3. Based on that verified data, companies have to purchase and surrender CBAM certificates to cover their carbon tab. If you don't follow these steps, your goods simply do not clear customs, period.
So that leads us right into Section 3, creating the trust market, verifiable data as the new currency.
When we compare old market dynamics with the new, the evolution is crystal clear. In traditional trade, suppliers essentially competed on 2 main pillars: price and quality. If your steel was strong and cheap, boom, you won the contract. But under CBAM trade, a third, equally critical pillar has entered the chat. Trust in your carbon data is now a mandatory competitive metric right alongside cost and quality. If your steel is incredibly cheap and exceptionally strong, but your emissions data is a total mess or unverified, that border tax is going to skyrocket. Suddenly, you aren't the cheapest option anymore, and you lose the contract.
Just as global trade needs trusted financial institutions to verify money, this new era absolutely requires trusted auditing to verify carbon footprints. Carbon data just isn't a fluffy environmental statistic anymore. It's a hard financial metric. It dictates tariff rates, market access, and ultimately profit margins. Because accurate, audited data directly saves importers money at the border by replacing punitive default assumptions made by regulators, that verifiable data inherently holds real monetary value. It truly has become a brand new type of global currency.
Investing in supply chain transparency is no longer a nice-to-have. It's directly tied to the financial bottom line of importing goods. The financial difference between guessing and knowing is honestly pretty stark. If you rely on unverified default data, meaning you just shrug and tell regulators you don't know your exact emissions, the EU will apply default values which are punitively high. You'll face maximum penalty costs. But if you provide audited primary data proving your emissions are actually lower than the default, you optimize your costs. You pay far less at the border, which means your product stays highly competitive on the open market.
Let's look ahead with Section 4, the future of global trade, moving beyond just compliance and into competitive advantage. Right now, we're kind of sitting in the messy middle of a major evolution. Think about it. A decade ago, international trade was almost exclusively focused on costs. Today, in the present, we're in the CBAM transition period, where everyone is frankly scrambling to figure out how to collect and verify all this data. But looking a decade ahead, the writing is absolutely on the wall. Standardized global carbon auditing isn't going to just be an EU quirk, it will be a foundational requirement for doing business across any major international border.
So, to wrap up the key takeaways from this explainer, you really want to keep these 4 pillars in mind. First, trust is no longer a soft PR concept. It's a strictly price commodity. Second, relying on estimates is totally over. Primary data collection is now mandatory. Third, transparency isn't just about feeling good anymore. It directly equals a competitive financial advantage. And finally, the burden of proof falls squarely on the entire supply chain. The companies that can seamlessly prove their data from end to end, they're the ones who will ultimately win the market.
I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought to consider as you look at your own industry's readiness for this unavoidable economic shift. We know the rules are changing. We know that invisible carbon now carries a very real, highly visible price tag. And we know that data verification is the absolute key to unlocking global markets moving forward. The mechanism is already in place. So the only question left to ask yourself is your supply chain actually ready to trade and trust?